Welcome, Agile Summit climbers. My name is Michał Parkoła, and I'm hosting this session with our amazing speaker, Teresa Torres. Teresa is an author, speaker, and product discovery coach, and author of Continuous Discovery Habits. Welcome, Teresa.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
I'm happy to have you. So before we begin, I would like to invite you to also check out other sessions during the summit, like the one with Luke Holman about profit streams. Check them out at agileonlinesummit.com. Okay, let's dive in. So, Teresa, your book, Product Discovery Habits or Continuous Discovery Habits, is one of the most frequently recommended books I have come across. So, for people who maybe heard about it but don't know exactly what it is about, so what problem does it solve, and how to get started?
Yeah, my goal with the book was to create a very hands-on, practical guide for product teams, so cross-functional product teams that are being asked to deliver an outcome. So a lot of us, we grew up in a world where we're told to build specific features. Some of us still work that way, but companies are starting to shift to this outcome focus of you got to drive engagement, you got to drive retention, whatever the outcome is. And we kind of have to relearn our jobs, right? It's a new way of working. So my goal with the book was to give people a very practical guide for what do I do now? What does this new world look like?
Yeah, that's great. So, let's say someone is in this situation and they are eager to get started. What would be a minimum viable discovery setup to help someone take the first steps?
Yeah, so I actually named the book Habits for a reason. I think it's easy to read the book and think, well, if I don't do all of this, I'm doing something wrong. But that wasn't my intent. My intent was to look at it as here's a collection of habits that when we do them, they support better decision making. But we don't have to do all the habits before we get any value. You can actually pick any of the habits to start with. And I actually recommend that you adopt one habit at a time. And when it becomes a part of the way that you work, you move on to another habit. So then the big question becomes, well, what habit do I start with? And I'll share some of the common mistakes. I see a lot of teams that maybe they work in feature factories. They're being asked to ship feature after feature, and they pick the first habit in the book. So the first habit in the book is focus on outcomes. Well, here's the challenge. If your organization just cares about outputs and you're an individual contributor, focusing on outcomes is going to be hard. You're like pushing the boulder up a hill. It's going to fall back on you because you're not speaking your organization's language. So I recommend that people not think about it as a linear set of habits. I have to do this one first, then this one, but instead look at, given my organizational context, what's the easiest habit for me to adopt first? And I think for a lot of us, if we work in a feature factory, the first habit I would adopt is identifying the assumptions that your solutions depend upon. So then the chapter in the book is all about story mapping and using story maps to generate assumptions. And there's a few other exercises to help you generate assumptions. Everybody can do that habit. You don't need access to customers. You don't need permission. It's actually a habit that starts to expose where there's risk in your ideas. So literally everybody can start there and they're going to get value right away. I think if you do work in an organization where it's fairly simple to get access to customers, I think interviewing regularly gives you the biggest bang for your buck. So if that's possible, I would start with interviewing. But again, it's really about, given your organizational context, what's the easiest habit to start with, and then work one habit at a time.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that touches on one problem that we've been struggling with in many of the talks in this track, which is this feature factory problem that you mentioned, or featureitis, as we like to call it in the other interviews. So you mentioned, like, don't try to fight against your organization. Just find something that you can do in your environment. Like, do what you can with what you've got every day. But that's one way to look at it. But let's say we want to get our foot in the door of this kind of conversation. What would be something you recommend to kind of build this trust, build this credibility, to be able to have those conversations eventually? Maybe the organization is not ready now, but how do we move towards it?
Yeah, let's talk through what's probably the most common scenario where a stakeholder comes to a product team and says, build this idea. And inevitably, because the product team are product thinkers, they can go from a vague idea